Look, nobody expected Jake Hendricks to save humanity. Least of all Jake Hendricks. The guy was a GS-11 administrative coordinator for the Interstellar Relations Bureau, which is government speak for professional email forwarder. His job was to schedule meetings, proofread memos, and occasionally water the plastic plants in the lobby because nobody had told him they were plastic. He was aggressively mediocre at all of these tasks. So naturally, when the Krellian Empire demanded an immediate face-to-face negotiation with Earth's representatives, and when literally everyone qualified was attending a conference on the other side of the galaxy, Jake got the call. At 2 in the morning, while he was 7 beers deep into what he called Tuesday. "Mr. Hendricks," his supervisor had said over the comm, voice tight with panic, "you need to be on the diplomatic shuttle in 4 hours. The Krellians are threatening to glass the eastern seaboard unless we send someone to Outpost Kepler immediately." Jake had squinted at his phone. "Is this about the overdue parking tickets? Because I can explain the one from March. Just get on the shuttle." 4 hours later, Jake stumbled onto the diplomatic vessel wearing the same wrinkled button-down shirt from the day before, smelling vaguely of cheap beer and cheaper decisions, with exactly zero preparation for what was about to happen. His briefing packet was still sealed. He had spent the shuttle ride trying to remember if he had locked his apartment and watching a compilation video of cats falling off furniture. Rita Valdez, the actual diplomat assigned as his attaché, had taken one look at him and started stress-eating antacids like candy. "Okay," she said, pulling up a holographic display as they approached the station. "The Krellians are a warrior culture. Strength, honor, combat prowess. Do not show weakness, do not make jokes, do not, under any circumstances, mention that you are terrified." "I am not terrified," Jake lied, looking extremely terrified. "Your left eye is twitching. That is unrelated." The shuttle docked. The airlock hissed open. And there, in the cavernous meeting hall of Outpost Kepler, stood Warlord Thrakis of the Krellian Empire. He was 9 feet tall, covered in segmented armor that looked like it had been forged from a nightmare, and had more weapons strapped to his body than Jake had utensils in his kitchen. His face was all sharp angles and bone ridges, with eyes that glowed an unsettling shade of amber. Behind him stood 24 Krellian warriors, each one looking like they could bench press a truck and then eat the truck for breakfast. Jake took one look at this and felt his hangover intensify. "Behold," Thrakis boomed, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "The human arrives. We have studied your transmissions. We know what you are capable of. We know your legacy of conquest." Jake blinked. "I think you have the wrong guy. I work in accounting services." Rita elbowed him hard in the ribs. "What my colleague means," she said smoothly, "is that his strategic capabilities are vast and classified." Thrakis narrowed his glowing eyes. "The transmission spoke of your many victories, your prowess in combat, your ability to, and I quote, go all night long with stamina for days." Jake's brain, still foggy with remnants of cheap lager, took an embarrassingly long time to catch up. Then his eyes went wide. "Oh no. Oh yes," Rita muttered under her breath. Someone, somewhere, in the intelligence division, had intercepted Jake's galactic singles dating profile and mistaken it for a military dossier. His extremely exaggerated, borderline fictional dating profile that he had made at 3 in the morning after a bad breakup 6 months ago. "Your profile claimed expertise in multiple positions," Thrakis continued, consulting a datapad. "Flexibility in tactics, an appetite for adventure and, quote, spicy situations." "I was talking about Thai food," Jake whispered, hoarsely. Rita closed her eyes. "Just roll with it." Thrakis stepped forward, his armored boots clanking against the metal floor. "We Krellians respect strength. We respect warriors. Show us that humanity deserves a place in this galaxy, and we shall have peace. Disappoint us, and your eastern seaboard becomes a crater. Are we understood?" Jake's mouth had gone completely dry, his heart was hammering. And worse, much worse, he was starting to sweat, the nervous kind of sweat. The kind that starts at your hairline and just keeps going. "Sure," he croaked. "Totally understood. Peace. Warriors. Craters bad. Got it." And that was when Warlord Thrakis saw Jake's neck. The thing about nervous sweating is that it does not care about your dignity, your career, or the fate of the eastern seaboard. Jake's collar was soaked within 30 seconds, sweat rolled down his temples, his wrinkled shirt was developing impressive pit stains that would have made his mother ashamed and his dry cleaner rich, and as the fabric clung to his skin, it revealed something Jake had completely forgotten about. The tattoo. He had gotten it during his junior year of college, after a semester abroad and approximately 6 shots of something that tasted like regret. His grandmother had just passed away, and in a fit of sentimental drunkenness, Jake had decided to honor her memory by tattooing her handwritten beef stew recipe on the left side of his neck. It had seemed meaningful at the time. In the morning, it had seemed like a catastrophic lapse in judgment. By graduation, he had just accepted it as part of his personal brand of poor life choices. The tattoo was faded now, pale blue ink spelling out ingredients and instructions in his grandmother's shaky cursive handwriting. 2 pounds beef chuck, 1 onion diced, simmer 3 hours, add bay leaves at the end. Jake had honestly forgotten it was even visible. He had spent the last 4 years wearing high collars and strategic scarves. But now, with his shirt plastered to his skin, every word was on full display. Thrakus stopped mid-step. His glowing amber eyes locked onto Jake's neck. His expression shifted from aggressive posturing to something Jake could not quite identify. Was that fear? No. That could not be right. The marks? Thrakus whispered, his booming voice suddenly quiet. You bear the sacred marks. Jake touched his neck self-consciously. Oh. Yeah. That is just... It is a recipe. For stew. Dead silence. Every single Krellian warrior in the room had gone absolutely still. Several had taken a step backward. One had dropped his plasma rifle. Rita was staring at Jake like he had just grown a second head. A recipe. Thrakus repeated slowly. For stew. Beef stew, Jake clarified, because apparently his brain had decided this was the time for specifics. My grandmother's. It is actually pretty good if you do not burn the carrots, which I always do, so really I should not be trusted with it unsupervised. Another beat of silence. Then Thrakus did something that made absolutely no sense whatsoever. He took 3 steps back. You speak of the simmering, Thrakus said, his voice tight. The 3 hours of patient waiting. The adding of sacred leaves only at the moment of completion. Well, yeah, Jake said, confused. You have to add the bay leaves at the end or they get too bitter. It is about timing. One of the Krellian warriors made a sound that might have been a whimper. Thrakus's bone ridges had gone pale. And the beef chuck. The 2 pounds. This is your count? Jake blinked. I mean, you can adjust it depending on how many people you are feeding. Grandmother always said the recipe scales pretty well for groups. Scales for groups? Thrakus repeated faintly. Rita was frantically pulling up something on her datapad, her fingers flying across the screen. Her eyes went wide. She grabbed Jake's arm and squeezed hard enough to leave a mark. Do not stop talking, she hissed in his ear. Whatever you do, keep talking about the recipe. What? Why? Just trust me. Jake turned back to Thrakus, who was now consulting with his warriors in rapid, guttural Krellian. They kept glancing at Jake's neck and then looking away, like the tattoo might bite them if they stared too long. So, Jake continued awkwardly, the key is really the simmering. You cannot rush it. Low heat, long time. Grandmother always said patience was the secret ingredient. Also Worcestershire sauce, but that is harder to tattoo. Patience, Thrakus said. The long path, the refusal to rush what requires time. Exactly, Jake said, feeling like he was finally connecting with his audience. You have to let the flavors develop. If you crank the heat, you just end up with tough meat and disappointment. Tough meat and disappointment, one of the warriors muttered, sounding genuinely disturbed. Rita was typing furiously now, pulling up file after file on her pad. Jake could see fragments of text scrolling past. Krellian cultural database. Ancient prophecies. Culinary traditions. Founding myths. The diced onion, Thrakus said carefully. You speak of it as singular. 1 onion for 2 pounds. I mean, you could use 2 if you really like onions, Jake said with a shrug. But 1 is usually enough. You do not want to overpower the beef. Balance, Thrakus whispered. The harmony of elements. Sure, Jake agreed, because what else was he going to say? Thrakus turned to his warriors. They were having what looked like a very intense conversation, complete with aggressive hand gestures and growled sentences that Jake's translator implant was not quite catching. Rita leaned close again. Their cultural database just auto-translated your tattoo, she whispered urgently. The Krellian language is context-heavy. Simmer came through as patient stalking. 3 hours translated as extended campaign. Bay leaves at the end became final strike at the moment of weakness. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. Oh no. Oh yes. They think your neck is covered in torture techniques and battle strategy. It is a stew recipe. They do not know that. Should we tell them? Absolutely not. We are outnumbered 40-1 and the nearest military support is 3 weeks out. Right now they think you are some kind of ancient warrior sage. Let them think that. Jake looked at the Krellian warriors, who were all staring at him with expressions ranging from terror to awe. "This is insane," he muttered. "This is diplomacy," Rita corrected. "Now smile and say something ominous about vegetables." Jake had never been good at poker. He had never been good at bluffing. He once tried to convince his landlord that his rent check was in the mail and ended up confessing the truth in under 30 seconds because the guilt was too overwhelming. But apparently, when the fate of the eastern seaboard hung in the balance, Jake's brain decided to unlock a previously unknown talent for absolute nonsense. "The vegetables," he said slowly, trying to channel every cooking show he had ever half-watched while eating cereal in his underwear. "They are critical to the process." Thrakus leaned forward. "The process, you have to respect the vegetables," Jake continued, gaining confidence from somewhere deep in his hangover-addled soul. "Each one has its purpose. The carrots provide sweetness. The celery provides structure. The potatoes absorb the wisdom of everything around them." Rita made a choking sound that she tried to pass off as a cough. "Absorb the wisdom," Thrakus repeated, his voice hushed with what might have been reverence or horror. Jake could not tell which. "Oh yeah," Jake said, nodding sagely. "You cannot rush a potato. You put it in too early, it falls apart. Too late, and it stays hard. Timing is everything. My grandmother used to say a properly cooked potato could teach you everything you need to know about strategy." This was a complete lie. His grandmother had never said anything remotely philosophical about potatoes. She had once called them the lazy vegetable because they just sat there until you decided to deal with them. But Thrakus did not know that. The hard exterior yielding to patient pressure, one of the warriors murmured, "The lesson of siege warfare." "Sure," Jake said, because apparently he was just agreeing with everything now. "Siege warfare. Absolutely." Rita was furiously scribbling notes on her datapad, her stylus moving so fast it was practically smoking. Jake caught a glimpse of her screen. She had titled the document, "Food Terms That Work as Threats." Under effective she had listed, simmer, patience, bay leaves, timing, absorb. Under avoid she had written, garnish, zesty, al dente. "Tell them about preparation," Rita whispered. "Preparation sounds military." Jake cleared his throat. "Of course. Before you even start cooking, preparation is key. You have to dice the onions properly. Uniform pieces. My grandmother was very specific about that. She said inconsistent cuts led to inconsistent results, and inconsistent results led to chaos." "Chaos," Thrakus breathed. "Total chaos," Jake confirmed, really leaning into it now. "You cannot have some pieces large and some pieces small. Everything has to be the same size or the whole operation falls apart. Discipline in the small things leads to victory in the large things." He had absolutely stolen that last bit from a motivational poster in his office break room, but it sounded impressive. The Krellian warriors were nodding now, their expressions grave. Several had pulled out their own datapads and were taking notes. "And the searing," Jake continued, because he was apparently on a roll now and his brain had completely detached from his common sense. "Before the simmering comes the searing. High heat. Short time. You have to brown the meat on all sides, lock in the juices, create a crust." "A defensive barrier," Thrakus said. "Exactly," Jake lied. "It protects the interior, keeps everything tender inside while presenting a strong exterior to the world." Rita had added searing and browning to her list of effective terms. Under a new category labeled possibly too effective she had written, "Crust, juices, tender. The sacred marks speak of salt and pepper to taste," Thrakus said, reading from his datapad's translation of Jake's tattoo. "This is the variable element. The adaptation to circumstance." Jake had not even remembered that his grandmother had written salt and pepper to taste at the bottom of the recipe. "But sure. Why not? You have to taste as you go," Jake said, nodding like this was profound wisdom instead of basic cooking advice. "Every situation is different. Every ingredient brings something unique. You adjust. You adapt. You do not follow the recipe blindly. You use your instincts." "Instincts," one of the warriors whispered with something approaching religious fervor. Rita added taste as you go to the effective list and then wrote in all caps, "He is accidentally writing their military doctrine." "And the Worcestershire sauce," Jake added, because he had completely lost control of his own mouth at this point. "That is the secret weapon. The thing your enemy never sees coming. Just a few dashes. Changes everything." Thrakus had gone very still. The hidden element. The unexpected strike. My grandmother used to say that Worcestershire sauce was proof that sometimes the smallest additions make the biggest impact, Jake said. Which was actually true. His grandmother had said exactly that, usually while liberally dousing everything she cooked with the stuff. The Krellian warriors were in a full huddle now, their voices urgent and excited. Jake caught fragments of translation through his implant. The tender one knows the old ways. The sacred patience our founders spoke of. He bears the marks. The actual marks. Rita grabbed Jake's elbow and physically turned him away from the bend, sir. Krellians. What is happening? Jake hissed. You are accidentally fulfilling a prophecy, Rita hissed back. I am talking about stew. They do not know that. Their translation matrix is context-dependent. Every cooking term you use is getting filtered through a military lens. You just described marinating as prolonged psychological warfare. I did not say marinating. You were about to. I could see it in your eyes. Do not mention marinating. Why not? Because according to their database, it would translate as something involving acid baths and enemy decomposition, and I would like to get through this meeting without anyone screaming. Jake felt sweat rolling down his back. The good news was that the Krellians were apparently terrified of him. The bad news was that he had no idea how long he could keep this up. How much longer do I have to do this? He whispered. Until they agree to the peace treaty, or until you run out of grandmother's recipe. Rita whispered back. The recipe is not that long. Then start making things up. I cannot just make things up. Rita gestured at the room full of heavily armed aliens who were currently treating Jake like he was some kind of culinary prophet of doom. You have been making things up for the last 10 minutes, and it is working beautifully. Just keep going. Thrakus turned back to face them. His expression had shifted again. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, respect. Oh no. Human, Thrakus said formally. We must know. Before we proceed further, before we commit to any path, we must know the truth. Jake's heart stopped. This was it. They had figured it out. They knew he was a fraud. The eastern seaboard was doomed. His dating profile had killed millions. What truth? He croaked. Thrakus stepped forward, and, in a move that made absolutely no sense and would haunt Jake's nightmares for years to come, dropped to one knee. Are you? Thrakus asked, his voice heavy with meaning. The tender one? Jake stared at the 9-foot-tall alien warlord kneeling in front of him and felt his brain simply give up. Am I the what now? The tender one, Thrakus repeated, still on one knee, head bowed. He who knows the way of patient victory. The prophecy speaks of one who would arrive bearing the sacred marks of the old patience. One who understands that true strength comes not from the quick strike, but from the long preparation, from the careful balance of elements, from knowing when to apply heat and when to let things rest. Rita was frantically scrolling through files on her datapad, her eyes getting wider with each screen. You have got to be kidding me, she muttered. The prophecy? Jake squeaked. Thrakus rose to his feet, and his warriors all dropped to their knees in unison. The sound of armored bodies hitting the metal floor echoed through the chamber like thunder. 3,000 years ago, Thrakus began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting scripture. Our civilization was savage. We knew only the fast kill, the immediate conquest, the quick burn. We were strong, but we were scattered. We destroyed more than we built. Jake nodded slowly, having absolutely no idea where this was going. Then came the founder, the first teacher. She was not a warrior by our standards. She carried no weapons. She conquered no territories. But she taught us the greatest lesson our species has ever learned. Which was? Jake asked, though he was terrified of the answer. That patience is the deadliest weapon, Thrakus said. That low heat applied over time achieves what no amount of flame can accomplish in haste. That the warrior who can wait 3 hours for victory will defeat the warrior who demands it in 3 minutes. She taught us that true mastery comes from understanding when to add each element, when to let things develop, and when to trust the process. Rita looked up from her pad, her face pale. Their founding cultural hero was a chef, she said flatly. The Krellian Empire, the most feared warrior race in 3 sectors, was founded by someone who taught them military strategy through cooking metaphors. The founders' teachings have been passed down for millennia, Thrakus continued. But the original marks, the actual symbols in her hand, were lost to time. We have only translations, interpretations, until now. He gestured at Jake's neck. You bear marks that match the oldest fragments we have recovered. The instructions, the wisdom, the way of the patient victory. Jake touched his neck, feeling the faded ink of his terrible college decision. But this is just, he started, then caught Rita's desperate headshake. This is just what I was taught. By my own elder. My grandmother. It was technically true. His grandmother had taught him the recipe. The fact that she had taught it to him because he kept asking what was for dinner and she got tired of explaining it verbally was irrelevant. Your grandmother, Thrakus said slowly. Was she a great warrior? Jake thought about his grandmother. 5'2", loved bingo. Once hit a deer with her Buick and cried for 3 days. Had strong opinions about the proper way to fold fitted sheets. She was the toughest person I ever knew, Jake said, which was actually completely true. Thrakus nodded solemnly. The elder warriors. The keepers of ancient knowledge. This is our way also. One of the warriors stood up, still looking shaken. What do we do, Warlord? If he is truly the tender one, then the prophecy states that we must honor his wisdom. We cannot wage war against one who bears the marks. Thrakus turned back to Jake. The prophecy is clear. If the tender one arrives, we must seek peace. We must learn from his patience. We must abandon the quick burn for the long simmer. Jake felt Rita's elbow dig into his ribs. She was right. He needed to say something. Something wise. Something that would seal this absolutely insane deal. But his mind was completely blank. So naturally, his mouth started working without permission. Peace is good, he said. Peace is like, letting the stew cool before you serve it. Otherwise everyone burns their tongue and nobody is happy. Thrakus straightened. Wisdom. The cooling period. The respect for proper timing even at the moment of completion. Sure. Jake said weakly. That, Rita was adding cooling period to her list with a note that said, this is insane but keep going. Jake had somehow stumbled into being an accidental messiah to a warrior race because of a drunken tattoo and his grandmother's cooking. The eastern seaboard was saved by beef stew. Diplomacy was weird. Rita grabbed Jake's arm with a grip that could crack walnuts and physically dragged him toward the corner of the chamber. Emergency bathroom break, she announced to the Krellians, with a smile so forced it looked painful. The tender one requires a moment of, meditation. Very sacred. Do not follow us. Thrakus nodded reverently. Of course. The contemplation before the final wisdom. We shall wait. The moment they were around the corner and out of earshot, Rita spun Jake around and grabbed him by both shoulders. Okay, she said, her voice tight and controlled in the way that suggested she was approximately 3 seconds from screaming. We need to talk about what happens next. What happens next is I tell them the truth, Jake said, panic finally catching up to his nervous system. I tell them this is all a huge misunderstanding. I tell them I am not the tender one or whatever. I tell them this is my grandmother's recipe for stew, and I got it tattooed on my neck because I was drunk and sad and made poor choices. We come clean, right? That is what we do? Rita stared at him like he had just suggested they solve the diplomatic crisis by juggling live grenades. Absolutely not. What do you mean absolutely not? Jake, listen to me very carefully. Rita took a deep breath. Humanity is losing this conflict. Badly. We are outgunned, outnumbered, and out of options. Our nearest battle fleet is 3 weeks away. The Krellians have enough firepower in orbit right now to turn the eastern seaboard into a parking lot. And they were planning to do exactly that before you accidentally convinced them you are Space Jesus. I did not mean to. I know you did not mean to. That is what makes this so perfect. If you had been trying, they would have seen through it immediately. But you showed up hungover, nervous, and accidentally started reciting prophecy through beef stew instructions. They think it is fate. They think the universe sent them a sign. Jake felt his stomach drop. So what are you saying? I am saying we are in the middle of the greatest diplomatic breakthrough in human history. And it is happening because a warlord thinks your neck tattoo is holy scripture. We cannot throw that away. But it is a lie. It is a misunderstanding, Rita corrected. There is a difference. You have not actually lied about anything. Everything you said about the recipe was true. It is not your fault their translation software has a very specific cultural bias. Rita, I cannot do this. I can barely make the stew correctly. I always burn the carrots. The one time I tried to make it for a date, I somehow set off the smoke alarm and the sprinkler system. My grandmother would be horrified if she knew I was representing her recipe as some kind of warrior gospel. Your grandmother, Rita said firmly, would be thrilled that her recipe saved millions of lives. Jake opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. That was actually probably true. His grandmother had been intensely competitive about her cooking. She once made his grandfather eat her pot roast in front of a neighbor just to prove hers was better. She absolutely would have loved the idea of her beef stew bringing an interstellar empire to its knees. I cannot keep this up, Jake said weakly. What if they ask me something I do not know? What if I run out of recipe? What if I accidentally say something that breaks the prophecy? You just need to hold it together for 10 more minutes, Rita said. Maybe 15. Just go back in there, say something vaguely profound about cooking and patience, and get them to sign the peace treaty. That is it. Once the treaty is signed, we can let the actual diplomats handle the rest. You never have to see them again. And if I mess up? Then the eastern seaboard becomes a crater and we both lose our jobs. But no pressure. Jake leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. His hangover was back with a vengeance. His shirt was still soaked with nervous sweat. His neck tattoo. The single, worst decision of his college career was apparently the only thing standing between Earth and annihilation. This is insane, he muttered. This is diplomacy, Rita repeated. Now pull yourself together. Channeling your grandmother got you this far. Channel her for 10 more minutes. I do not know if I can. Jake. Rita's voice softened slightly. What would your grandmother do right now? Really? If she were here, what would she say? Jake thought about it. His grandmother, standing in her kitchen, wooden spoon in hand, apron covered in flour, the way she would squint at him when he messed something up. The way she never accepted excuses or explanations. Just results. She would tell me to stop whining and finish what I started, Jake admitted. Exactly. So let's go finish this. Rita turned to head back to the chamber. Jake grabbed her arm. Wait. If this works, if I actually pull this off, what happens after? Rita hesitated. Honestly, I have no idea. You will probably get promoted, or fired, or both. The Krellians might want a formal cultural exchange. They might want you to attend ceremonies. They might want you to actually cook the stew. I cannot cook the stew. Then you better call your grandmother and get the recipe right, because I have a feeling this is not going to be a one-time thing. My grandmother is dead, Rita. That is why I got the tattoo. Then fake it, figure it out. Do whatever you have to do. But right now, in this moment, you are the tender one, whether you like it or not. So act like it. Jake took a deep breath. Then another. Then he straightened his shoulders, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and walked back into the chamber like a man heading to his execution. Thrakus and his warriors were waiting, still kneeling, still reverent. The tender one returns, Thrakus announced. We are ready to hear your final wisdom. Jake looked at Rita. She gave him the smallest nod. This was it. No more stalling. No more accidents. He had to actually close this deal. Time to channel his grandmother one more time and hope she was not rolling over in her grave. Jake stood before the kneeling Krellian warriors and realized something profound. He had no idea what he was doing. But his grandmother had not known what she was doing either when she first made the stew. She had just tried things, added things, tasted as she went, made mistakes and adjusted. That was the whole point of cooking. You learned by doing, not by knowing. Maybe that was the whole point of everything. All right, Jake said, his voice steadier than he felt. I am going to share with you the final wisdom. The thing my grandmother taught me that mattered more than any recipe. Thrakus looked up, his amber eyes intense. We are listening, tender one. Jake thought about his grandmother. Really thought about her. Not the recipe, not the tattoo. But the actual woman. The one who had raised him when his parents were too busy. The one who had taught him more than she probably realized. My grandmother used to say that you cannot rush what needs time, Jake began. And this time he was not making it up. These were her actual words. She said the world is full of people who want everything right now. Fast food, fast money, fast results. But the things that matter, the things that last, those take patience. The warriors were leaning forward now, hanging on every word. She said low and slow wins the race. Not because slow is better, but because some things cannot be forced. You cannot make a tough piece of meat tender by cranking up the heat. You just burn the outside and leave the inside raw. You have to give it time. You have to trust the process. Thrakus nodded slowly. The long campaign. The sustained effort. And she said you have to taste as you go, Jake continued. Because every situation is different. Every ingredient is unique. You cannot follow the same plan every time and expect the same results. You have to pay attention. You have to adjust. You have to be willing to add more of something or less of something based on what is actually happening, not what you think should be happening. Adaptation. One of the warriors murmured. Flexibility within structure, but the most important thing she ever told me. Jake said, and his voice caught slightly. Because this part was real. This part hurt, was that none of it matters if you do not care about the people you are feeding. She said cooking is not about following recipes, it is about taking care of people, about showing them they matter, about putting in the work because you want them to feel good. The chamber had gone completely silent. She said you can have the best technique in the world, the fanciest ingredients, the most perfect timing, but if you do not cook with love, it is just food. And food is not enough. People need to know you care. That is what makes something worth eating. That is what makes something worth anything. Jake wiped his eyes quickly, hoping nobody noticed. So yeah, he said, his voice rough. That is the wisdom. Low and slow. Taste as you go. And for heaven's sake, remember that you are doing all of this for someone. Not for yourself, not for glory, but because taking care of each other is the whole point. Thrakus stood up. His warriors followed. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the warlord placed his massive clawed hand over his chest in what was clearly a gesture of deep respect. The tender one has spoken, Thrakus said quietly. And we understand. We have spent centuries perfecting the art of patience and conquest. But we forgot the purpose. We learned to wait, to plan, to strike at the perfect moment. But we forgot who we were doing it for. We turned the teachings into weapons and forgot they were meant to build something. He turned to his warriors. The prophecy is fulfilled. The tender one has arrived and reminded us of what our founder actually meant. Strength without purpose is just violence. Patience without care is just cruelty. We have lost our way. Thrakus pulled out a datapad and began typing rapidly. We will sign the peace treaty. Not because we fear humanity, though your tender one is clearly formidable, but because he has reminded us that there are things more important than conquest, like caring for those who depend on us. Rita was frantically pulling up the treaty documents, her hands shaking with relief or terror, or possibly both. This is acceptable? She asked, her diplomat voice back in place. It is necessary, Thrakus corrected. We have much to learn, and perhaps, if the tender one is willing, he might teach us more of the old ways. Jake felt his soul try to leave his body. Oh, I am sure we can arrange cultural exchanges, Rita said quickly, shooting Jake a look that clearly said smile and nod. The tender one is very busy, of course. But perhaps periodic consultations could be arranged. We would be honored, Thrakus said. He looked at Jake. There is one request, tender one. One tradition we must honor if the prophecy is truly fulfilled. What tradition? Jake asked, terrified of the answer. You must prepare the sacred meal for our High Council, the one from your markings. The one that contains all the wisdom. We must taste what patience and care can create when combined with skill. Jake's mouth went completely dry. You want me to cook the stew? Next month, on our homeworld. For the Council of Elders. It would cement the peace. Show that you trust us enough to share the sacred knowledge not just in words, but in practice. Rita's datapad showed a new note in all caps. Say yes, now figure it out later. I would be honored. Jake lied through his teeth. The treaty was signed. The Krellians departed with much ceremony and bowing, and Jake stood in the empty chamber, staring at his hands, wondering what the hell he had just agreed to. Rita walked over and handed him her flask. He took a long drink. So, she said, you have 1 month to learn how to actually make that stew. I cannot make the stew, Rita. I told you. I always burn the carrots. Then you better figure it out. Because in 4 weeks, you are cooking for the most powerful warrior council in 3 sectors, and if you mess it up, this whole peace treaty might collapse. Jake looked down at his neck, at the faded blue ink of his grandmother's handwriting. She never wrote down the tricks, he said quietly. The little things she did that made it work. The way she knew when it was done, just by smell. The way she could tell if it needed more salt without tasting it. That stuff was not in the recipe. That was just her. Then you better channel her one more time, Rita said. Because apparently, your grandmother's beef stew is now the foundation of interstellar peace. Jake laughed. It was slightly hysterical. She would have loved this. She would have been absolutely insufferable about it. She would have told everyone at bingo that her recipe saved the world. She would have been right. 3 weeks later, Jake stood in his apartment kitchen, surrounded by cooking books, video tutorials, and 17 failed attempts at beef stew. His smoke alarm had gone off 6 times. He had called every relative who might remember his grandmother's tricks. He had taken notes like his life depended on it, because it kind of did. And slowly, painfully, Batch by batch, he started to figure it out. Not because he was talented, not because he was gifted, but because he was patient, because he tasted as he went, because he cared about getting it right, just like she had taught him. When he finally made a batch that tasted right, that tasted like her kitchen, like Sunday dinners in comfort and home, he sat down at his table and cried. "Thanks, Grandma," he whispered to the empty room. "I really hope you are enjoying this from wherever you are. Because this is absolutely insane, and it is all your fault." Somewhere, in whatever came after, Jake liked to think she was laughing. 1 month later, Jake Hendricks stood in the great hall of the Krellian homeworld, wearing his best suit and his terrible tattoo, and served beef stew to the High Council. They loved it. The peace held,